The morning air was crisp as Eleanor Washington walked toward Westridge High School. At 62 years old, her steps were slower than they once were, but her mind remained sharp. Today was important. Her first day as the new principal, but she had chosen to arrive early, before the official staff welcome. Eleanor wore simple clothes, comfortable jeans, a plain sweater, and practical shoes. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She carried 2 heavy boxes filled with personal items for her new office. The school board had warned her about Westridge's problems: falling test scores, increasing fights, and worst of all, growing racial tensions. "This is just what I need for my final challenge before retirement," Eleanor had told her daughter on the phone last night. After 35 years in education, she had seen everything. Or so she thought. As she struggled with the side door, balancing her boxes, she heard laughter. 3 boys and 2 girls stood near the bike racks, all wearing the blue and gold of Westridge High. They looked to be juniors or seniors, and they were staring at her. "Hey, look at Grandma trying to clean the school," one boy called out, his voice carrying across the empty parking lot. "They must be desperate if they're hiring people that old," another boy added. Eleanor paused but kept her face calm. In her long career, she had learned when to speak and when to observe. A tall girl with long blonde hair stepped forward. "Do you need help, or can you manage with those ancient muscles?" The fake sweetness in her voice made the insult worse. The first boy stepped closer. "I bet she can't even hear us." "Hey," he shouted louder. "Can you hear me, or do you need your hearing aid?" Eleanor said nothing, just studied their faces carefully. The name tags on their sports jackets read Jason, Tyler, Brittany, Megan, and Dion. Interesting that Dion, the only black student in the group, laughed along with them. "Maybe she doesn't speak English," Tyler suggested. "They're probably hiring the cheapest janitors they can find." "Yeah, 2 for 1, old and black," Jason laughed. "That's like winning the diversity bingo for the school." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice calm and clear. "Could one of you hold the door, please?" They looked surprised that she spoke perfect English. After an awkward pause, Dion moved forward to hold the door. "Thank you," Eleanor said, walking past them. "Whatever," Jason muttered. "Just make sure you clean the boys' locker room first. It stinks in there." Eleanor continued inside, hearing their laughter fade. She found her way to the main office where Ms. Jenkins, the school secretary, recognized her immediately. "Principal Washington, we weren't expecting you for another 2 hours." Ms. Jenkins jumped up to help with the boxes. "I see you've already met some of our challenging students." "Yes," Eleanor said, setting down her boxes. The welcoming committee was quite informative. "Oh dear, I hope they weren't too rude." Ms. Jenkins looked worried. Eleanor smiled. "Nothing I haven't heard before, and nothing we won't address." She looked at her watch. "The assembly is at 9:30, correct? Where all students will meet their new principal." "Yes, ma'am. Everyone will be there." "Excellent." Eleanor's eyes held a spark of determination. "I believe some of our students are in for quite a surprise." As she unpacked her items, Eleanor thought about those 5 students. Their behavior told her everything she needed to know about Westridge's problems. By the afternoon, they would learn their first important lesson: appearances can be deceiving, and respect is not optional. 2 hours later, Eleanor stood behind the stage curtain of the school auditorium. The noise of 900 students filing in echoed throughout the space. She had changed into a tailored navy blue suit with a simple pearl necklace, the outfit she had originally planned to wear for her first day. Mr. Garcia, the vice principal, reviewed his introduction notes nervously. "The students don't know about the leadership change yet," he explained. "Principal Richardson left so suddenly after the scandal." Eleanor nodded. The previous principal had resigned after reports of misusing school funds. That was just one of Westridge's many problems. "You have quite a reputation," Mr. Garcia continued. "The miracle worker from East Side High." Eleanor smiled slightly. "No miracles, just hard work and respect." Before taking this job, Eleanor had spent 15 years turning around East Side High, a school once known for gangs and violence. Now it had one of the highest graduation rates in the district. Before that, she had taught English in some of the toughest schools in the city. Her career had started in 1989, when black female principals were rare. A photo of Eleanor and the school board sat in her purse. Her late husband had been so proud when she got her first principal position. "You'll change lives," he had told her. After his death 5 years ago, work became even more important to her. The superintendent had personally asked Eleanor to come out of her planned retirement to help Westridge. "One last challenge," he had said. "These kids need someone who won't give up on them." Eleanor's thoughts were interrupted by the 5 students from the morning entering the auditorium. They took seats near the back, laughing loudly. Jason, the ringleader, put his feet up on the chair in front of him, ignoring a teacher who asked him to sit properly. "Those students," Eleanor said, pointing discreetly. "Tell me about them." Mr. Garcia sighed. "Our most challenging group. Jason Miller's father is on the town council. The boy thinks he's untouchable. Tyler Ross follows whatever Jason does. The girls, Brittany Chen and Megan Wilson, are top cheerleaders. And Dion Wallace." He paused. "Dion is trying to fit in. He's actually smart, but since joining their group, his grades have dropped." Eleanor watched them carefully. "And the racial tensions I've heard about? Getting worse every month," Mr. Garcia admitted. "We've had slurs written in bathrooms, fights between student groups. Some parents are threatening to transfer their kids out." The morning incident made more sense now. These students were symptoms of a larger problem. "Principal Washington, your background makes you perfect for this situation," Mr. Garcia said. "Your work integrating divided schools in the 90s, your anti-bullying programs." Eleanor raised her hand to stop him. "Let's not focus on the past. These students need to see action, not hear about old achievements." The assembly bell rang. Mr. Garcia moved to the microphone as students settled down. "Good morning, Westridge High," he began. "As many of you have heard, Principal Richardson has left our school. Today, I'm honored to introduce your new principal." Eleanor smoothed her jacket and touched the small photo in her pocket, the one of her and her husband on the day she became a principal. It was her private ritual before every important moment. "She comes to us with over 30 years in education," Mr. Garcia continued. "Please welcome your new principal, Dr. Eleanor Washington." As Eleanor walked onto the stage, she saw confusion spread across the auditorium, but her eyes went straight to the back row. Jason's feet dropped from the chair in front of him. Tyler's mouth fell open. Brittany and Megan exchanged panicked looks. Dion sank lower in his seat. Eleanor stood at the microphone, her posture perfect, her expression calm but determined. "Good morning, Westridge. I'm Dr. Washington," she said clearly, "and I believe some of us have already met." The auditorium fell silent as Eleanor stepped toward the microphone. 900 students stared at their new principal. Most looked curious or bored, but 5 faces in the back row showed something different: shock and fear. "For those I haven't met yet, I am Dr. Eleanor Washington," she began, her voice strong and clear. "I'm honored to join the Westridge High community as your new principal." A whisper moved through the crowd. Students turned to look at the 5 in the back row. Word had already spread about their morning encounter with the old janitor. Eleanor continued, "I believe schools should be places of respect, growth, and opportunity for everyone." She paused, looking directly at the back row. "And I do mean everyone." Jason slid down in his seat, his usual confidence gone. Tyler stared at the floor. Brittany tried to look bored, but her nervous leg bouncing gave her away. Megan's face had turned bright red. Dion looked like he wanted to disappear. "Some of you might wonder about my background," Eleanor said. "I've spent 35 years in education. I taught English, served as vice principal at 3 schools, and spent 15 years as principal of Eastside High." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Eastside High was famous for its turnaround. "Before this morning, I studied Westridge's records closely," Eleanor continued. "I know about the declining test scores. I know about the increasing behavioral problems. And yes, I know about the racial tensions." The room became uncomfortably quiet. "What I learned in my files was educational, but what I learned in your parking lot this morning was even more valuable." Eleanor's eyes returned to the 5 students. "It showed me exactly where we need to start." Brittany whispered something to Megan, who shook her head quickly. "At Westridge, we will rebuild based on 3 simple principles." Eleanor held up one finger. "First, respect, for ourselves and others, regardless of age, race, or position." A second finger went up. Second, responsibility for our actions and their consequences. A third finger joined. Third, community, because a school divided will always fail. She stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. Let me be very clear, she said, no longer using the microphone, forcing everyone to listen carefully. I see you all, the good, the bad, and everything between. I see your potential, even when you don't see it yourselves. Several students sat up straighter. Others looked nervous. I'm not here to punish. I'm here to build. But make no mistake, her voice became firmer. Disrespect will not be tolerated. Not toward teachers, not toward staff, and certainly not toward fellow students. Eleanor returned to the podium. We'll be making some changes. Some you'll like, others you won't. But change is coming because what's happening now isn't working for anyone. In the back row, Jason finally looked up, meeting Eleanor's eyes for a brief moment before looking away. One last thing, Eleanor said. My office door is always open. If you need help, come find me. If you have ideas to improve our school, I want to hear them. If you made a mistake, she paused meaningfully, I believe in second chances, but you need to earn them. As the assembly ended, Eleanor asked, would Jason Miller, Tyler Ross, Brittany Chen, Megan Wilson, and Dion Wallace please come to my office after this assembly? Gasps and whispers filled the room. The 5 students froze. The rest of you are dismissed to your first period classes. Let's make this a great day at Westridge. As students filed out, Eleanor watched the 5 troublemakers huddled together, arguing in whispers. Dion broke away first, walking slowly toward the front. After hesitating, the others followed. Mr. Garcia leaned toward Eleanor. That was impressive. What will you do with them? Eleanor gathered her notes, something they don't expect. Suspension? Mr. Garcia asked. No, Eleanor smiled slightly. I'm going to listen to them. Eleanor sat behind her new desk, arranging 5 chairs in a semicircle across from her. She placed a box of tissues within reach, not because she expected tears, but because she understood that uncomfortable conversations sometimes needed such small comforts. A soft knock came at the door. Enter, Eleanor called. Dion came in first, head down. The others followed slowly, none making eye contact. Jason entered last, trying to appear casual but failing. Please, sit down, Eleanor said, gesturing to the chairs. They sat awkwardly. Brittany and Megan whispered to each other until Eleanor raised an eyebrow, silencing them instantly. Do you know why you're here? Eleanor asked. Silence filled the room. Tyler stared at his shoes. Megan picked at her nail polish. We're sorry about this morning, Dion finally said. We didn't know who you were. Eleanor studied him carefully. And if I had just been a janitor, would your behavior have been acceptable? Dion looked down again. That's what I thought, Eleanor said. She opened a folder on her desk. Let's talk about each of you. She pulled out the first file. Dion Wallace, honor roll student until last semester. Basketball team, your English teacher says you have real talent for writing. She looked up. But your grades have dropped dramatically in the past 4 months. Right around the time you started hanging out with this group. Dion shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor moved to the next file. Brittany Chen, cheerleading captain, strong in science. 3 incidents of bullying younger students. She looked at Brittany. Your mother is a doctor, correct? What does she think about how you treat people? Brittany's eyes widened. You called our parents? Not yet, Eleanor replied calmly, but I will if necessary. She continued through each file, naming their strengths alongside their problems. When she reached Jason's file, she paused longer. Jason Miller, student council, football team, 7 disciplinary actions, all dismissed. She closed his file. Your father's position on the town council has been helpful to you. Jason finally spoke, some of his confidence returning. My dad says you can't do anything to us without his approval anyway. We were just joking around this morning. Eleanor leaned forward. Is that what you think this meeting is about? Punishment? The 5 students looked confused. I'm not going to suspend you. I'm not calling your parents today. I'm not even giving you detention, Eleanor said. Relief washed over their faces. Instead, she continued, You're going to learn something much more valuable. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the school grounds. Each of you will complete a special assignment. You'll work with Ms. Ramirez, our community service coordinator. Community service? Tyler protested, but we didn't do anything illegal. Consider it educational, Eleanor replied. Jason and Tyler, you'll help Mr. Peterson, our 68-year-old groundskeeper, for the next month. The old guy who can hardly walk? Jason asked. The Vietnam veteran who maintains our entire campus despite his war injuries, Eleanor corrected. Brittany and Megan, you'll assist in the ESL program, helping our immigrant students practice English. The girls exchanged panicked looks. And Dian, Eleanor turned to him, you'll work with me directly, creating a student mentorship program focused on racial unity. Dian looked up, surprise in his eyes. Why are you doing this? Megan asked. Why not just punish us and get it over with? Eleanor returned to her desk. Because punishment ends. It doesn't teach. What you said this morning wasn't just hurtful to me. It revealed how you think about older people, about black people, about people you see as beneath you. She looked at each student in turn. Your assignment begins today. Ms. Ramirez is waiting for you in room 110. As they stood to leave, Eleanor added, one more thing. I believe people can change. I've seen it happen thousands of times. The question is, do you believe it? The students filed out silently, but Dian paused at the door. Dr. Washington, I really am sorry. Eleanor nodded. Prove it, Mr. Wallace. Not with words, but with actions. After they left, Eleanor sat alone, thinking about the anger she'd seen in Jason's eyes, the shame in Dian's, and the fear in all of them. She hadn't told them the most important part. Their assignment wasn't punishment. It was a chance to see the world through different eyes. 2 weeks passed since Eleanor assigned the special projects. The school hallways buzzed with rumors about what had happened with the famous five, as they were now called. Most students noticed the changes in the troublemakers, all except one. Eleanor stood by the window in her office, watching Jason Miller argue with Mr. Peterson near the football field. Even from this distance, she could see Jason's angry gestures and disrespectful posture. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Ms. Ramirez entered, carrying progress reports. I have updates on our special projects, Dr. Washington. How are our students doing? Eleanor asked, returning to her desk. 4 of them are showing improvement, Ms. Ramirez reported. Diem is excelling with the mentorship program. The younger students love him. Brittany and Megan were resistant at first, but they've connected with 2 Vietnamese sisters in the ESL program. Tyler has been working hard with Mr. Peterson, even coming in on Saturday to help with the broken sprinklers. And Jason? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Ms. Ramirez sighed. He shows up late, complains constantly, and yesterday he simply walked off in the middle of his work. Eleanor nodded. Thank you. Please continue with the others. I'll handle Jason myself. After Ms. Ramirez left, Eleanor made a difficult call. 30 minutes later, a tall man in an expensive suit stormed into her office without knocking. This is ridiculous, he announced. I'm Robert Miller, Jason's father, and a member of the town council. Eleanor stood calmly. Mr. Miller, thank you for coming. Please have a seat. I don't need to sit. I need you to stop targeting my son, he demanded. First this so-called community service, and now I hear you're threatening to remove him from the football team. I haven't made that decision yet, Eleanor replied evenly. But Jason has been disrespectful to staff and refusing to complete his assigned work. Robert Miller laughed coldly. My son doesn't need to pick up trash or help some old man. He's going to Stanford next year on a football scholarship. If he continues on his current path, Eleanor said, he may find those college opportunities disappearing. Character matters to universities too, not just athletic ability. Miller's face reddened. You can't. I can, Eleanor interrupted firmly. And I will if necessary. That's not why I called you here today. She gestured again to the chair, and this time Miller sat down reluctantly. I want to understand why Jason behaves this way, Eleanor explained. Children learn their attitudes somewhere. Miller stiffened. Are you calling me racist? I'm asking about your home environment, Eleanor clarified. Jason shows unusual anger toward authority figures, particularly women and minorities. Before Miller could respond, the office door opened, and a woman stepped in hesitantly. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said softly. "Traffic was terrible." "You called my wife too?" Miller asked, surprise in his voice. "I did," Eleanor confirmed. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for coming." Sarah Miller sat beside her husband, her posture tense. "I've been concerned about Jason's behavior for years," she admitted. Her husband turned to her, shocked. "Sarah, it's true, Robert," she continued. "Remember when he called his 7th-grade teacher that horrible name, or when he reduced his Spanish tutor to tears? We've been making excuses for him too long." Eleanor watched this exchange with interest. The dynamic between them revealed volumes about Jason's home life. "Mrs. Miller," Eleanor asked, "would you be willing to help supervise Jason's community service? Perhaps 3 days a week?" "Absolutely not," Robert answered for his wife. But Sarah straightened in her chair. "Yes, I would. It's time I took a more active role in addressing this." Robert stood angrily. "This is absurd. I'll be speaking to the school board about this." "Feel free," Eleanor replied calmly. "They're fully aware of my methods. They hired me for them." After Robert stormed out, Sarah remained behind. "He'll calm down," she said quietly. "He always does." "Mrs. Miller," Eleanor said gently, "Jason's behavior didn't develop overnight, but with your help, we can turn this around." Sarah nodded, hope and determination in her eyes. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow," Eleanor replied. "And please call me Eleanor." For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt optimistic about Jason's future. The February morning arrived with an unexpected snowfall. Eleanor woke with a deep, painful cough that had bothered her for days. Her doctor had warned her about pushing herself too hard at her age, especially during flu season. But Eleanor had never missed work for illness in 35 years of teaching. Today would be different. "Dr. Washington won't be in school for the rest of the week," Ms. Jenkins announced over the morning intercom. "She has a severe case of pneumonia. Vice Principal Garcia will be in charge until she returns." The news spread quickly through Westridge High. By lunchtime, rumors were flying. "I heard she's not coming back at all," a freshman told his friends in the cafeteria. "My dad says the school board forced her out," another student claimed. "Good riddance," whispered a senior football player at Jason's table. "She was ruining this school with all her equality talk." Tyler, sitting across from Jason, frowned. "That's not true. Test scores are up since she came." "Whatever," the football player laughed. "You're just saying that because she's got you picking up trash with the janitor." "With Mr. Peterson," Tyler corrected. "And he's the groundskeeper, not a janitor." Jason remained quiet, picking at his food. His mother had been supervising his community service for 3 weeks now. The experience had been unexpected. Mr. Peterson had fought in Vietnam, lost friends, and still woke up every day to care for the school grounds. Jason had never thought about the old man's life before. Across the cafeteria, Brittany and Megan sat with the 2 Vietnamese sisters they'd been tutoring. They were laughing together, showing each other photos on their phones. Dion approached Tyler and Jason's table, something he hadn't done in weeks. "Did you guys hear about Dr. Washington?" "Yeah, she's sick," Tyler said. "No, not just that." Dion lowered his voice. "Kevin from the office overheard the teachers talking. They're saying she might not come back even after she recovers. The stress might be too much." "Good," said the football player. "We need someone who understands how things work around here." "Shut up, Mark," Jason suddenly snapped. Everyone at the table stared at him in surprise. After lunch, Tyler was walking to class when he noticed Mark and 2 other football players sneaking toward the main office. "What are you guys doing?" Tyler asked. "Nothing," Mark answered too quickly. "Just need to grab something." Tyler watched them enter the hallway leading to Eleanor's office. Something didn't feel right. He followed quietly. Through the partially open door of Eleanor's office, Tyler could see Mark and his friends. One was spraying something on the wall behind her desk. Another was dumping the contents of her desk drawer onto the floor. "Hey," Tyler shouted. "What are you doing?" Mark turned, spray paint in hand. "Mind your own business, trash boy." The words they were painting became clear, racist slurs against black people. Without thinking, Tyler tackled Mark to the ground. "Stop it." The commotion brought Mr. Garcia running. "What's going on here?" Everyone froze. The graffiti was clearly visible. It was Tyler. Mark quickly lied. "We caught him doing this." Tyler started to defend himself when another voice spoke from the doorway. "That's not true." Jason stood there, phone in hand. "I recorded everything." It was Mark and his friends. Tyler tried to stop them. Mr. Garcia looked from the graffiti to the boys. "All of you, to the conference room. Now." Later that afternoon, Dion, Brittany, and Megan gathered in the school library. "Did you hear what happened?" Brittany asked. "About the graffiti?" Dion nodded. "Jason turned them in." "Jason?" Megan looked shocked. "Our Jason." "Hard to believe," Dion agreed. "Tyler said Jason even offered to help clean Dr. Washington's office before she gets back." They sat in silence, processing this information. "Things are really changing around here," Brittany finally said. "Maybe we're all changing," Dion suggested. As they talked, Mr. Garcia passed by with a serious expression. He paused at their table. "I just got off the phone with Dr. Washington," he said. "She wants to thank whoever stood up for her today. She'll be back on Monday." After we left, the three students looked at each other with small smiles. For the first time in months, they felt proud of their school and themselves. Spring arrived at Westridge High, bringing fresh air and new beginnings. 3 months had passed since Eleanor's illness, and the school had changed in ways no one expected. Eleanor stood at her office window, watching students cross the sunny courtyard. The 5 troublemakers who had once mocked her were now scattered among different social groups, no longer a tight pack of bullies. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Ms. Ramirez entered with a folder. "The latest test scores, Dr. Washington. I thought you'd want to see them right away." Eleanor took the folder and smiled as she reviewed the numbers. A 12% increase since January. That's remarkable. "And disciplinary referrals are down 60%. Ms. Ramirez added. "Teachers say they can actually teach now instead of constantly managing behavior problems." Eleanor nodded, pleased but not surprised. When students feel respected, they behave differently. When they have purpose, they focus better. After Ms. Ramirez left, Eleanor checked her calendar. She had a meeting with Dion in 15 minutes to discuss the mentorship program. Under his leadership, 20 seniors now mentored freshmen from different backgrounds. The program was helping bridge racial divides that had troubled the school for years. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Dr. Washington, there's a situation at Franklin High you should know about," Mr. Garcia said urgently. "A video is circulating online showing their basketball coach using racial slurs toward players. Some of our students have friends there, and tensions are rising." Eleanor sighed. "Franklin was Westridge's biggest rival. Thank you for letting me know. Keep me updated on our students' reactions." Later that day, Eleanor was reviewing budget proposals when Jason knocked on her open door. "Dr. Washington, do you have a minute?" he asked, more polite than she'd ever seen him. "Of course, Jason. Come in." He sat down, looking nervous but determined. "It's about the Franklin High situation. Students here are planning to protest at their game Friday night. Some want to cause trouble." Eleanor studied him carefully. 6 months ago, Jason would have led such trouble. "And what do you think should be done?" "I think we should respond, but not with anger," Jason said, surprising her. "My mom and I were talking about it. She suggested we show support for the Franklin players without attacking their school." "That's a thoughtful approach," Eleanor said. "Do you have ideas?" Jason nodded, pulling out a paper with notes. "Tyler, Dion, and I thought maybe we could organize something more positive, like wearing unity shirts or holding signs supporting the players." Eleanor couldn't hide her smile. "That sounds like a plan worth developing. Would you like to present it at tomorrow's student council meeting?" "Really?" Jason looked shocked. "You trust me with that?" "You've earned it," Eleanor said simply. After Jason left, Eleanor reflected on his transformation. His mother's involvement had been crucial. Sarah Miller had become a regular volunteer at school, and the change in her son was remarkable. The next afternoon, Eleanor watched from the back of the room as students from all grades gathered to hear Jason's proposal. Brittany and Megan sat with their ESL students. Tyler had Mr. Peterson beside him. The older man had become something of a mentor to him. Dion stood confidently near the front, ready to support Jason's presentation. "We have a choice," Jason told the crowded room. "We can respond with hate, or we can show what respect looks like. Franklin's coach was wrong, but attacking their whole school won't help those players." The room was silent as he continued. "6 months ago, I wouldn't have cared. I would have just wanted to start trouble." Jason paused, looking briefly at Eleanor. "But I've learned something important here. How we treat people matters. How we respond to hate matters even more." By the end of his speech, the students were applauding. Even those who had initially wanted a more aggressive approach seemed convinced. As the meeting ended, Eleanor overheard a freshman ask Dion, "How did Jason change so much?" Dion glanced toward Eleanor before answering. Someone saw something in him worth saving, even when he didn't see it himself. Eleanor smiled to herself as she walked back to her office. The transformation wasn't complete. Real change never happened overnight, but Westridge High was healing. Student by student, day by day, the school was becoming the community she had envisioned that first morning. The June sun shone brightly on Westridge High's football field, transformed for the end-of-year ceremony. Rows of chairs filled the grass where hundreds of parents, students, and community members gathered for the final assembly. Eleanor Washington stood just off stage, watching the crowd settle. Her first year as principal had been challenging, exhausting, and more rewarding than she had imagined. At 62, she had considered retirement before taking this position. Now she had different plans. "5 minutes, Dr. Washington," Ms. Jenkins said, handing her a glass of water. Eleanor nodded, thinking about the announcement she would make today. The school board had already approved her request to stay 3 more years at Westridge. She wanted to see her work completed, to ensure the changes would last. Vice Principal Garcia approached with 5 nervous-looking students: Jason, Tyler, Brittany, Megan, and Dion. "They're ready," Mr. Garcia said. "Although I'm not sure they're telling me everything about this surprise." The 5 students exchanged secret smiles. "Don't worry," Eleanor assured him. "I approved their presentation." As Mr. Garcia began the assembly, Eleanor thought back to that first morning in the parking lot. The insults these 5 students had thrown at her seemed like ancient history now. Dion had become president of the student mentorship program, which now included 30 pairs of students from different backgrounds. Brittany and Megan had started a welcome committee for new immigrant students. Tyler had discovered a passion for landscaping while working with Mr. Peterson and had already secured a summer job with a local company. And Jason, her most difficult challenge, had perhaps changed the most. After his mother became involved, after the office incident, something had shifted in him. His natural leadership abilities, once used to bully others, now served a better purpose. And now, Mr. Garcia announced, "We have a special presentation from our Student Leadership Committee." The 5 students walked onto the stage. Jason stepped to the microphone while the others arranged themselves behind him. "Good morning, Westridge," Jason began, his voice clear and confident. "When Dr. Washington arrived here 8 months ago, our school was broken. Test scores were down. Fights happened every week. Different student groups barely talked to each other." He paused, looking out at the audience. "And I was part of the problem. My friends and I thought we ran this place. We disrespected others. We bullied people. And on Dr. Washington's first day, we insulted her, not knowing she was our new principal." A murmur ran through the crowd. Many had heard rumors about that morning, but few knew the full story. "We thought she would punish us," Jason continued. "Instead, she taught us. She made us see people we had ignored, like Mr. Peterson, who takes care of our grounds despite his war injuries. Like the ESL students who are working twice as hard as the rest of us. Like the freshmen who were afraid to walk these halls because of kids like me." Jason looked back at Eleanor with genuine respect in his eyes. "Today, we want to announce something new," he said. "The school board has approved the creation of the Washington Standard for Excellence, an annual award for students who show exceptional character, leadership, and service to others." Dion stepped forward with a plaque, which Jason presented to Eleanor as she joined them on stage. "And the first recipient," Jason said, "is Mr. Dion Wallace, for creating the mentorship program that has changed our school." The audience erupted in applause as Diem accepted a smaller version of the plaque, looking stunned. Eleanor stepped to the microphone. Thank you all. This honor is unexpected and deeply appreciated. But the real credit belongs to these students who had the courage to change. She looked at the 5 students beside her. People often ask me why I became an educator. This is why: to witness transformation, to see young people discover their best selves. Eleanor smiled at the audience. Today, I'm announcing my plan to remain at Westridge for 3 more years before retirement. We started something important here, a community where respect crosses all boundaries. That's a legacy worth building together. As the assembly ended, Eleanor watched Jason walk to his mother in the audience. Sarah Miller hugged her son with pride shining in her eyes. Nearby, Mr. Peterson chatted with Tyler's parents. Brittany and Megan introduced their ESL students to their families. The seeds planted in those difficult early days had grown into something beautiful. Westridge wasn't perfect, no school ever would be, but it had become a place where an old black lady was no longer just someone to mock, but someone to learn from, and that, Eleanor thought, was progress worth celebrating.